All right, welcome to episode 42 of the Jake Blanchard podcast, brought to you in part, as always, by Fellowship Brand Premium Men's Grooming Products. Go to fellowshipbrand.com, enter the code JBP at checkout. Get yourself free shipping on your first order on beard oils, balms, upcoming tattoo balm, all kinds of really great stuff. They make a really quality product. And again, that's fellowshipbrand.com. My guest today on episode 42 is Kevin Settles. Kevin is the owner of Bardenay Restaurant and Distillery located in Idaho. There's 3 locations of the restaurant. It was one of the first 30 distilleries in the U.S. Kevin has a really amazing story here. And it's funny, I wasn't planning on doing this as a podcast. I have a web series called Out Jakes. I was spending time with Kevin. We were talking about the process of distilling alcohol. We were talking about their famous gin and banana liqueur. And when we sat down to do an interview, it just ended up going about 40, 45 minutes. And I could not help but think of what a wonderful way to complement that web series with a kind of a full-length podcast here. Kevin shares their journey about changing laws in the state of Idaho in order to have a distillery within a restaurant. He talked about how he got into distilling in the first place, how he went into the restaurant touring area as well. So fascinating story here, different format than I usually do, but definitely worth the watch. I hope you enjoy. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Bardenay has been a staple of downtown Boise for over 20 years. It's a fantastic restaurant, and it was really cool to learn more about its origins and where it's headed. So cheers. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to explore the restaurant and talk about distilling spirits here in Idaho.
Thanks. It's always fun to talk about our business, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so this is a really, one, interesting location down here in downtown Boise, and then 2, you do something pretty unique here. And you've been doing it for quite a while.
21 plus years.
Which is distilling spirits. And so, maybe give me a backstory here. How did you get into owning a restaurant? How did you get into distilling? Which came first?
It's a convoluted story. My college degree is in ski resort management from Community College in Central Washington. So you can't work in the ski business all year long from the instruction side. So I worked in the apple industry, and through that I learned about how to ferment apples. And in 1985, 86, my wife and I started a hard cider company up in Sandpoint, Idaho. It was a unique spot to do it, but people in Sandpoint would cross the border and knew about the large Canadian market for hard cider. So started a hard cider company, ran it for 10 years, essentially kind of grew it beyond my capacity. So sold it, and during that time I developed an interest in learning how to distill. Actually, specifically, I developed a passion for gin martinis and thought, well, wouldn't that be cool to make my own gin? I didn't want to go back into the retail side of the product, though. With the cider company, we sold to Safeway, Albertsons. I didn't care much for that side, so I thought, why not put a distillery in a restaurant? Nobody had done it yet, but just because nobody had done it didn't mean it couldn't be done. So I spent about 3 years looking into rules, regulations, partnered up with some restaurateurs here in Boise, who actually, they were the ones that found the building and built the restaurant side of it, and I put together the distillery and bar side of the original business. And then once we got up and running, it just made sense. Essentially, I got more and more involved in the restaurant side. It's the more active side. And after the second year, I bought out all the partners and have been running Bardenay ever since, and we've expanded it to 3 locations. And
okay.
Here we are.
So then this building that we're in is in a historic district of Idaho, or Boise. It's the Bass District. What's the history of the actual building that we're in right now?
The building was built in 1905, so it's well over 100 years old, and it was built as a warehouse for Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph. And when we took over the space, you could actually, they had the floor drains that you would need for parking trucks inside, and it had been a number of things over the years. Its last use was as a warehouse for the people that own this business, our building, are the Business Interiors of Idaho. And so they had used it for furniture storage, and it had a full ceiling. The front end was all bricked in. It had a roll-up door. It did not look nearly this cool. The street was a wreck, full of potholes. And fortunately, you could see what it could be, and we were able to get the owners to agree to let us yank the ceiling out, peel the paint off the walls, bring it back to what it really was, fill in the floor drains, and it was a really fun project to do. So here we are, 21 years later.
Yeah, and this is in what's called the Basque District here in Boise. And then how does this restaurant fit in with kind of the history of Basque culture here?
Yeah, everybody because you have Bardenay and Bardenay, everybody thinks there's a tie-in. We're not Basque, but we try and be a good member of the Basque community.
Okay.
And we do feature chorizo and things on our menu, and we donate to the Basque events, and we make sure that we participate whenever they ask us to. And we were a key part of the group that got the wherewithal together to redevelop the street. Plans had been kicking around for years, and as I mentioned, it was the sidewalks were a wreck. It was just not a pretty neighborhood, and you always had the Basque Cultural Center across the street and the Basque Museum, and Bardenay Basque Bar. But it took, I think, the whole block to come together and say, look, we really want to do this, to get the highway district involved and the city of Boise, and spent about $200,000 back in 2000 to redo that street. And I think it was the fact that we'd come in and established a pretty good business, and along with the other interests in the block, that were able to get the community leaders to come together and support it.
And so let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned you spent 3 years or so looking at rules and regulations and things like that around distilling spirits. Like, what was currently in place, I think, across the country or in Idaho that was already doing this kind of work? And then did you have to go and work to change laws, or like how were you able to actually distill alcohol here?
Yeah, so at the time, back in 1999, I'm only aware of maybe 20 licensed distilleries in the U.S., and that would include Jim Beam, Jack Daniels. So you had a couple of small producers in California, St. George Spirits, which went on to be Hangar One, and some of these guys have gotten fairly large. But at the time, you had a little craft brandy producer. You had McMenamin Brothers in Oregon had just put a still on one of their properties, but really nobody was doing it. And nobody had done it in a public space. There had been interest, people were asking. Well, I think one of the unique things I brought to the table, when I started the hard cider company, I was only 25 years old, and I think the reason I was able to start it was because I was too stupid, essentially, to take no as an answer. And so when wineries, the hard cider company was a winery, and distilleries are highly regulated by the federal government. And I spent a lot of time reading through the regulations for the hard cider company, and contacted, back then it was the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Farms, and said, this is what I want to do. They reached out and said, you can't do it. We're going to tax you out of business. Just forget about it. Go away. And that just irritated me. So I dove into the regulations a little closer and called them back and said, so it was really about the carbonation in hard cider. There's a special tax rate for things that are carbonated, and kind of walked through the process with them and managed to get them to agree that I was right, that you could carbonate it at a certain level. Anyway, long story short, I believe I was the first guy in the U.S. ever given a license, a winery license, specifically to produce hard cider. So that experience was relatively minor change. When you'd reach out to the BATF back when we opened this and said, I want to put a distillery in a public space, they'd say no. Well, I spent that 3 years reading through the regulations, and this was back when you actually had to go to the library to read them because they weren't on the internet.
Okay.
And essentially could not find anywhere in federal regulations that barred you from putting a distillery in a public space, similar to this. So you couldn't put it in your basement. That's very clearly written into the law. But other stuff was just a habit of them saying you can't do it. And in addition, in Idaho, there's a provision that says that a distillery can only sell their products to the state of Idaho, being the liquor dispensary. And a licensee of liquor by the drink can only sell alcoholic beverages that they purchased from the state. So that provision had to be changed. So the first thing we did was I figured out that there was no block from the federal side other than just have it. And we hired a lobbyist, actually wrote up essentially one paragraph that allows a distillery to own a liquor by the drink license under very distinct circumstances. And we ran that through our legislature and got it passed in one session, which was really good. And really the argument was we can own a distillery and we can own a restaurant and bar. If you don't pass this, under our current conditions, we have to essentially sell products made in other states. If you'll pass this law, we can actually bring all those jobs within the state.
Okay.
And so that was the argument. And once that got passed, then we had a really good leverage with the federal government to reach out. And I'll back up for a minute. So once the law passed, then we went all in with this. And the room we're sitting in used to have a little ladies' restroom back in that corner.
Yeah.
It was 70 square feet. And so I actually took that space and got it licensed as a distillery. We had a little still, you'll see it out in Eagle tomorrow, that purchased out of Washington State. It's 5-gallon still, or 10-gallon still. And went through all the paperwork and processed it because that was a standalone place, not a public space, not tied into anything else. Was able to get it fully permitted as a distillery, even though it couldn't have produced more than a couple bottles. And so once that was done, in the process, I had done so much research, I did a very thorough application. And so, as I had learned to do with the hard cider company, about 2 months after I'd sent in the application, I called back, I got a hold of the agent that was reviewing my paperwork, and she said, listen, honey, we're gonna give you 25 pages of corrections, and this is gonna be it's gonna take forever. I said, okay, I just wanted to make sure you got it. And a couple days later, she called me back and said, I've never seen, this is amazing. That's the best application I've ever seen. You're so thorough. I got 2 questions. And essentially, so we got the permit right away.
Okay.
And then I said, thanks, now I got the permit. Here's what I really want to do. I want to move the distillery 30 yards and put it inside a restaurant. She said, oh, you can't do that. And we started this conversation of, there's nothing that says I can't do that. And so through multiple conversations, convinced this agent that it was legal. So she took it then and sent it off to their legal department in Cincinnati, and we went through the same process. You got to tell me where it says I can't do this. And I would knock down every objection they had. And then they actually sent it back to Washington, D.C. and went through the same process. We managed to get our elected officials helped a little bit, though they weren't always that popular with the BATF back then. But they definitely helped. And then when we actually submitted a letter from our governor in support of our project. So they just said, all right, we can't figure out why you can't do this. So we're going to approve it, but if you do this, this, or this, or this, we're going to remove your license. So essentially, that little distillery in there is the precedent-setting case for what has become a rather large industry. There's like 2,300 distilleries right now.
There's 2,300 liquor distilleries in the U.S. right now?
Yep.
Holy smokes.
So it's really come a long ways, and the places that people are citing them are so much different than what was allowed before we came along.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you move the, what do you call the unit? The
still.
The still. So you move the still into the restaurant. They put big glass kind of mirrors so people can see it, so they can be closer to that process. And you said you sell by the glass. Do you sell bottles as well? How does that work?
Yeah. So and actually, early, I knew early on this had to work. So like when the feds tried to tell me we couldn't do it, it's like, well, I can't accept that answer. So we had already purchased the still out of Germany. It took about 6 months to get it. We'd already built the space, and it's sat empty so long, waiting for the process. People were pretty sure that this was going to be a strip joint. Oh. There was a little pad in there in the window. No, it's not going to be a strip joint. But so anyway, once we got the permitted, the law that we passed in the state of Idaho still requires the distillery to sell everything it makes to the state. And the state still requires all licensees of holders of liquor by the drink license to buy all their product from the state. And the federal government will not allow, they require all spirits to be in a bottle, in a case, labeled, marked, coded, the whole 9 yards. So the distillery kind of runs as its own little entity. And you'll see today we're bottling rum, but we'll bottle that up. We will then take that and we will sell it to the state. And the product that we're going to sell by the drink in our restaurant, we will immediately buy it right back from them. They mark it up 87%, we buy it, and we've got a good relationship now. They'll actually come over to our location and we'll tag stamp it, acknowledge the receipt of it. We write them a check for the product, and then we'll take that paperwork and send them a bill for the initial amount. It's kind of convoluted, but it works well, and they treat us very well. But the state certainly makes a lot of money off of what we do without having to expend a lot of effort.
Okay, that makes sense. And then what kinds of spirits are you distilling here at Bardenay?
So we make rum, a ginger rum. As far as I know, we're the first distillery in the U.S. to make rum out of brown cane sugar. We use brown cane sugar because it ferments really nicely, smells great when it's fermenting, and produces a nice light rum that doesn't need to be aged. And the ginger rum, also I think at first, we take raw ginger and throw it in the fermenter with the cane. If you want to make rum, it has to be made from cane. So we make rum was our first product out of here, ginger rum. And we are doing some rye whiskey in this location also, which we have mashed the grains in at another local brewery and then bring them in here and ferment them. Out in Eagle, we make gin, lemon vodka, and we have strawberry, blackcurrant, rickseese liqueur, banana liqueur, and cherry. And then up in Coeur d'Alene, we make just straight vodka.
Okay. And what's the, I guess, the inspiration for those particular kinds of alcohol? Like, lemon, you said lemon vodka, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like what brought that to be? Is it just experimentation? Is it like just your palate?
Well, the one product, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to do a distillery because I developed a passion for gin and thought it would be fun to make my own. So that's where that one came from. And then vodka is the highest volume alcohol. So if you're going to have a bar and you want to sell, you want to make vodka. And one of the key principles for the Bardenay is that we want to make products that deserve to be on the top shelf with everybody else. We don't want to make people drink our products. So you'll notice we have a fully stocked bar out here. It's not a huge selection, but we carry what we consider to be all the best in the category. So vodka, we ended up, that was a struggle to learn to make it. It's really hard to make it from scratch, which is why most craft distillers don't actually do the initial fermentation or the initial distillation. They'll buy 195 proof spirit because those guys are doing what I think is the hardest part of the process. We ended up hiring a distiller who had a passion for vodka, and so he spent about 8 years kind of perfecting our technique, and I think we make a really good product then. Then we started to look at what was going on in the bar and messing around in Idaho, because you cannot, you'll see in other states a bar will take a 5-gallon or a gallon jar and they'll throw some lemongrass in it and some lemons, and they'll throw a vodka in it and let it sit. You can't do that in Idaho. Okay. Because you got to leave it in the original product and the original package. So we thought, well, lemon vodka is very key ingredient in a lot of our cocktails. Wouldn't it be fun if we made our own? So we spent probably a year trying to develop that recipe. Our lemon is a combination of whole lemons, lemon juice, lemon zest, and lemongrass. Okay. And so that's really kind of is what drives a lot of our products, is things we want to drink or things we want to make. The fruit liqueurs we make, I think we can do a better quality product because it's really just high proof spirit and the fruit. We don't bring in outside flavors, essences, nothing artificial. For the banana liqueur, we buy a bunch of bananas, we get them dead ripe and ferment them. And then we add, partway through the fermentation process, you throw in high proof spirit and it stops the fermentation. Well, there's still a lot of the natural sugar in it. Mm-hmm. It makes for a really rich, full flavored banana liqueur. Same process with the berries. And so I think it allows us to make better products for our cocktail program. At this point in time, the only place you can buy them is buy the drink in-house. Let's see, the other products, I've always wanted to do an aged rum. I think it's pretty fun. Essentially, as you go up the scale in high-end products, it's the time on wood that makes a difference between a high-end tequila, high-end whiskey of any type, be it bourbon, whatever. And you'll see a few aged rums out there. So we've been doing that for a while. And then my distillers, they're the ones that really wanted to do the rye whiskey. I don't want to make everything that we sell in the bar. I just don't know that we can always make the best products in every category.
Yeah.
But they were essentially spent 7 years developing this rye recipe that we just released last December. And that was a trade-off. I said, if you guys will do my fruit liqueurs that I want, you can do whatever you want for whiskey. And so they've come up with this rye whiskey. It's not going to be a huge volume for us, but it's been a fun project and something that's got a great place in our bar.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, like, for an experienced simpleton like myself, how are spirits made? Like, what is that process? And you kind of talked to it a little bit through describing some of them, but like, take me from the beginning. Like, you're starting with what kind of ingredients, where do you source those types of things, and then all the way to how do you bottle it, and then how do you get it to the end user?
Yeah, well, we shortcutted it to the end user by selling about, I guess, half of what we make now is sold in cocktails in the bar.
Okay.
And that was done specifically because I didn't want to go out and chase the market.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's your house.
That's our house.
Rum, your house, whatever, is Bardenay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then the state, because we're in a control state, the state will buy our excess product and put it out in their stores. And we've never actually had a marketing arm.
Okay.
For us, it's just been kind of organic. Anyway, back to the basic process. Everything we make except for the rye whiskey is cane based. So if you want to make rum, it has to be made from sugar cane. So that dictated the original product. And I messed around with potatoes. Potatoes, when you ferment, smell horrible. So you're not going to do that in a restaurant. And
it's
I don't care.
Idaho, man. It's Idaho.
You cannot. I tried raw potatoes. I tried potato flakes. It smells like poop.
Yeah.
And you don't want poop in your restaurant.
Yeah.
So that took that off the table. Same. We have beet sugar. Made right over there. Can't call it rum if it's made from beet sugar. So it's a federal definition of rum is it's cane based.
Okay.
There's a lot of minutia within federal regulations that define a product.
Is that like bourbon is from Kentucky, like same kind of thing?
Bourbon is 51% corn, aged for a minimum of 2 years in new oak barrels. So it can be made anywhere, but though it has to meet that criteria of 51% corn or more. So that's the example of the minutia. So when I get to the gin, I'll tell you, I think, an interesting little story. The basic process for us is we'll take brown cane sugar, warm water, liquefy it, throw champagne yeast in it. We use champagne yeast because it smells great. It doesn't impart a lot of flavor and ferments all the sugar out. So we'll take this sugar mixture, ferment it till where it's about 9% alcohol, and then we will throw that in the still. And depending upon which still we're running it through, this still here in Boise, it is a European eau de vie still. It likes to run at about 140 proof. So that 140 proof, it's 70% alcohol, 30% whatever else was in the fermenter. And then if you're making rum, that's about where we're going to stop. Or actually, we fermented up to 160 proof, and which we can get out of this still. So it's 80% alcohol, 20% sugar water is our basic rum formula. Then you take that and you bring it back down to 80 proof with water. Everybody does that, and run it through a filter. In our case, then we'll take some of that and we'll soak it in with oak chips to get a little color out of it, and then we'll add a little bit of sugar back for texture. We actually caramelize some sugar, add it back in for texture, and we make a light amber rum that way. If the gin essentially and the vodka start the same way. We ferment them, get that 9 to 10% alcohol. Those we distill up to about 194 proof, which is as high a proof as you can get out of a standard refractive still, as they call this. And at 100, you have to get above 190 proof to declare something vodka, and it becomes then a neutral spirit essentially. So the trick for us for that 8 years was to try and figure out how to get it up to 194 proof and strip out all these odd little flavors that is used. They start to concentrate and they're hard to get rid of. So we have a very specific process, and it takes about 8 steps, 8 passes through the still to get it. We take it up to 194 proof, then we water it back down, and then we run it back up again, and that cleans it up. And then we'll bring it to, for the vodka, it's 80 proof. And same thing, run it through a charcoal filter, bottle it up, and we're good to go. And it's that the initial fermentation and getting the off flavors out that's difficult. That's why you'll find a lot of distilleries don't do that anymore. And some of them would surprise you. They may say handcrafted on the label, but they're buying their neutral spirit from somebody else, and then maybe they'll run it through their own filtration system or think with it a little bit. But they want to avoid that initial fermentations can be difficult to manage, and just stripping out those initial flavors is very difficult. Okay. So it kind of goes against my soul to buy something. You know, if we say we made it, we made it. Yeah. If it's alcoholic and it's in our room, we started from a raw ingredient. So that principle applies to everything that we make, I think. So then to make gin, it's essentially the same process as making vodka. We do a London style dry gin, which means that you're taking vodka and you're flavoring it. By law, it needs to taste predominantly like juniper. So gin is super hot right now. And back when we submitted the original formula, so you have to get your space licensed, you have to tell them what you're going to do, then every time you want to make a new product, you have to send them a recipe, get the recipe approved, and then once the recipe is approved, you have to generate a label, design a label that complies with what you've stated in the recipe. So rum, vodka, pretty straightforward, right? But gin, most gins at the time had 5 or 6 ingredients. Ours has 12, right? So I submitted the formula, and they came back and said, it has to be with other flavors. I was like, no, this is gin. And they're like, no, we don't think it can be gin because you got too much stuff in it. So we were still just operating out of the little closet over here. I said, okay, send us a bottle. And I managed to make one 750 milliliter bottle it up, sent it back to DC, or went to DC, I think, for organoleptic analysis, essentially. They opened it up, smelled it, went, yep, that's gin, and approved the formula. So now there's a lot of other people that have a lot of ingredients, and that's part of their bragging point. But back then it was really unique, and so it killed me because that essentially wiped out everything I'd produced. And we spent months working on our gin recipe. Gin is a very complex flavor profile. High proof alcohol clouds your palate really quickly, and there's a lot of flavor nuances in there. So it is the most difficult product for us to make and maintain the same flavor profile over time. So we had worked this up, and that's all I had, and it killed me to send it off to them. But
and speaking of gin, there's a process I'm aware of at a high level, and I'm looking forward to potentially doing this with you guys, is gin smithing. Mm-hmm. And so maybe take me through that process.
Well, so that's because the flavors are so complex, and I don't think any one palate can pick out all the nuances in it. So we've developed a recipe 21 years ago, and we have tried very hard to make sure that the flavors don't drift off of that original recipe. And every once in a while we have to bring it back. But so we maintain an ongoing standard that we think tastes just like the original recipe. And the distillers will essentially build the batch, they'll ferment it up, bring it down, they'll take the botanicals, we have the 12 of them, and lemons, limes, they hand zest them at the time. They mash up the juniper berries, they grind up the coriander and caraway, and they stick it all in a little container and throw it in our little 10-gallon still, and just with 190 proof spirit, and distill that off to get the flavor out of it. Then we'll take that liquid and blend it to what we think should be the right proportions, bring it pretty close to bottling strength. And then when they think that it tastes like the standard and is ready to bottle, they call the gin smithing panel, and there's up to 8 of us that will show up, sometimes as many as 10 people will show up at 8:30 in the morning, can't have drank coffee prior to it, and you get 2 glasses, one with the standard and one with the new. They're cut in half with water and it's at room temperature, and you taste the 2 side by side and try and figure out if they're identical or if there is an adjustment that we need to make. And so it's pretty common. Maybe we just need more base. It doesn't have enough of the overall gin flavor, but it's common for us to say, well, it needs a little more orange, or needs a little more lime or caraway, and that's really, we can actually add the flavors are so intense, just a couple drops. We have each of those flavors isolated, separated in its own container, so we can add and mix and match. And that's what it takes for us to keep our product tasting the same. If we were a big commercial guy, we'd have it's an IR, they have a machine that'll actually tell you where all your flavor points are. For us, it's all about our palate. And the distillers, they have to have great palates, because there's multiple places in every production process that it all comes down to their taste.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of the reasons, a lot of guys, the first time whenever you fire up that still, you're going to get products that don't taste good, that will liquefy and come off the still first, and you have to stand there and taste them, because you can't measure it per se. You can get a general idea, but it's your palate that decides. When the off-tasting flavors are gone, you've got what you want to keep, then eventually you won't have enough alcohol left to get that flavor you want, and you have to be there ready to taste it and make the decision that it's time to stop saving it for for consumption.
Okay.
So, and everything we make, there's that decision point happens all day long.
All right, so we've been in a really interesting time for the last 15 to 18 months. Interesting time to not just have a restaurant, but to be distilling spirits by the glass and selling that in a restaurant. You're obviously open back up within regulations here in Boise. How's that been? And then what are you looking forward to in the coming months?
Actually, it's been really interesting, slowly opening back up, and we're really pleased with where business is. And it was fun when the state allowed us to start selling cocktails to go.
Okay.
And we could generate a lot of interest from that aspect. And also the pandemic, I think, caused people to look closer to home. So our retail sales, we call it, sales through the liquor store, have never been a huge part of what we do. Our focus has always been make sure we have the product available to sell by the drink in-house. But now you've definitely seen an increased demand for our product through the stores. And I think it's a really good time for us to capitalize on that. We're going to be bringing a salesperson on staff here and start pushing that side. And so that might not have happened but for the pandemic. We've just always kind of bumped along, and that was surplus business for us. But it's a small part of our overall profile. Back in the restaurant, once again, I think you'll see that our percentage of the overall liquor sales has continued to increase. I've always told our staff, if you come in and you want to have a Jack and Coke, sell them a Jack and Coke. Don't make them drink what we make just because we would make a little more money on it or anything. We want our customers to have a really good experience. But now more people are coming in saying, even more people are saying, what do you guys make? Yeah. What are you doing? We want to support things that we do. So that's been really good, and business has been coming roaring back. We still are doing the distancing and all that, 60% of our normal seating, but even with that, we're almost back to our normal sales.
Okay. And then what do you have coming in the future? Anything interesting, things that you'd want to share?
Well, no, I think we have a lot of, like I said, we're in the process of negotiating a deal to bring in a marketing arm for us, which that's a pretty big change for us, because I've never really wanted to go down that road. And I think if which we could have taken our products out of state 20 years ago. I'd get calls, brokers in New York City, brokers in LA. I just didn't want to go there. It cost so much money to expand. I never didn't realize how big craft distilling would get.
Yeah.
Really, marketing of distilled spirits is very difficult, and so I didn't want to go there. Well, now we've got a lot of guys. Most of the guys are kind of bumping along, but you've had some that have had some really good success, and so I think it's a good time for us to come back and look at that marketing side. And then we're going to take a breather. You know, we opened up a new restaurant. I call it Comfortable Fine Dining, called Coins, out in Eagle, next to our Bardenay out there.
Okay.
And it opened up for dinner on March 16th, opened up again for lunch on March 17th, and then shut down at 1:30 in the afternoon, thanks to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And opened back up about a month and a half later, and it's slowly built up. And so I'm very pleased with where its sales are now. And but we're just going to kind of take a breather a little bit, and we're in a really good position, I think, for us to take a look at what we want to do next. You know, we've always been looking at growing the business. Do we want to really push the distillery side more? I've got a spare still sitting out in storage. Do we want to stand that up somewhere? Do we want to focus more on the fine dining aspect? Do we want to? I spent too much time and money looking at expanding to Colorado. Glad I didn't get open over there. I think they really got hammered by the pandemic.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, we're in the process of looking at doing an ESOP, have that done within the next year, and then that changes the dynamic a little bit. The beauty of an ESOP is it really brings everybody that works for you into that process of where do we want to go. And I've already been working on that. I think I've always been really inclusive with the staff, but whether it's another Bardenay or another Coins or standalone distillery, I think it's a pretty exciting time because we are coming roaring back out of this pandemic.
And then what's been your favorite part of this journey so far? I mean, what do you reflect on and you're most proud of, or something that's just like really interesting that's happened along the way as you've kind of built these restaurants and built this brand?
Ooh, that's a tough question. You know, it's been in the first year we were open, I wouldn't even walk through the kitchen, right? It's like I had partners, that's your thing. In the second year, I started to get involved because I liked the back of the house stuff, the accounting side, and that kitchen needed some tightening up, and got it tightened up. At the end of the second year, I turned around and went, damn, I think I'm running the place. So it was my partners that essentially offered the separation. So I'm a little surprised I'm actually in the restaurant business. I've always thought of myself as a beverage guy, and now I think of myself more as a restaurateur, and that has led me to, I've been on the board of directors for National Restaurant Association for 12 years now. I've testified in front of committees on both the House and Senate back in DC. I've spoke at large conferences. I've been involved in a lot of legislative activities around here. Things I never thought I would have done. It's opened a lot of doors. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at where we are today, we've coming out of a pandemic as a better company than we went into it. We thought we were pretty good going into it. We have our average employees work for us for about 3 years, in an industry which it's closer to 3 months is the standard. My management staff has all been with me for a long time, and they seem to be as happy as they've ever been. So I think that's probably the part that's most satisfying, is that we have a good group of people that are happy with where we're going. We still don't know the next piece, but we know that we're growing. And I think, so for all of that stuff, that's probably the best part, to be sitting here able to seriously consider the ESOP, which until you do it, you should probably keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
But it's, I'm pretty certain that we'll be able to work all the parts and pieces. We have a very complex structure because of the distilleries and the liquor licenses and all that, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to make that work.
Awesome. And then tomorrow, you and I are going to go out to your Eagle location and check out the operations there. Maybe describe some of the equipment that I'll see in the distillery. I know we're going to check it out, check some things out here, but what name off all the different supplies and things? Just that there's the still, and then there's barrels, and then what else is involved in the process? Am I overcomplicating it?
Well, no, it is a surprisingly simple, complicated product or process. And one of the interesting things about distilling is that it's illegal to distill at home. So when we started everything up, I had this idea. I'm pretty sure I could figure this out. I went to the library and would get books on how to make fuel ethanol.
Okay.
And because that was all you could get.
Yeah.
Right. And I managed to buy the first still. I actually took my wife's teapot and made a still out of it, and distilled about that much out of it. Went, I can do this. And so it's simple enough that a guy like me could figure it out. And when we ordered this first still, nobody was making small stills for beverage in the U.S. So that's a German still, and the company I bought it from didn't think Americans should be distilling. So I got this thing in a crate, and there was no manual, no directions on how to put it together. You know, it's in pieces in a crate. And so I figured out how to put it together and how to make it work. We ended up, through that process, meeting some American guys that had been producing stills forever, Vendome Copper, and kind of explaining my predicament. And they came out and looked at what I was doing, and then we worked together to kind of design a basic still. And what you'll see out in Eagle tomorrow is our fourth still that we've purchased, right? And we learned a lot from the first one, more from the second and third one. And now the fourth one, I think, is pretty, for what we want to do, pretty state of the art. It's multiple column. It is much more efficient. It is still for craft production. And so we still have these decision points that you have to make with your palate. But it is so much more efficient, and it is, I think, indicative of where our market has gone. When I bought that still, you couldn't buy a nice still in the U.S. that I could find. Now you can definitely find some high quality equipment. And really, Vendome, they make all the stills for Jim Beam, Jack Daniels. They just didn't have a small client base, and they built this nice little division, I think, that does custom stills that are showpieces. Yeah. Right. And that, most of their, Jim Beam, they don't put a lot of polish on it except for maybe one little piece. Yeah. So it's what you'll see out there is kind of where craft distilling has come. Okay. In the U.S. tomorrow.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, this has been a fantastic interview, and I really appreciate you taking the time to take me on this journey about the origin story, as well as what it takes to have a craft distillery inside of a restaurant, which is fascinating.